Hey, gang, welcome. It's Chris from Ecoustics, and welcome to the podcast. This week, we've got some very special guests. We've got Brian Gluck from projectorscreen.com. Hey, Brian, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
And we've got Phil Jones from projectorreviews.com. Phil, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Cool. And today we're going to talk about the results and the behind the scenes at the 2024 UST Showdown event, which was held last week in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey, at an undisclosed location. Not really. It's the headquarters of projectorscreen.com. And let me feed it off to you guys to say, what went into this year's event. And I guess the first question would be, how did you guys pick the contenders? How did you pick which 8 were going to be the final 8 for the evaluation for the showdown this year?
Cool. I'll be glad to field that one if you'd like, Phil. All right, cool. So, obviously Phil's website, Projector Reviews, has an astronomical amount of traffic. He's involved with the projector industry in a huge way, and he understands what people are looking for, just as we do. We're using website analytics, we're using Google Trends, we're understanding where the conversation is at, and we wanted to make sure that the projectors that were included, were the latest and greatest, but also the ones that have the most volume of inquiries and interest behind them. So, for example, we had some successor models to previous models that did well last year, were introduced this time. We had a couple repeat projectors from last year that still have a high level of interest in them. And then, we had some new guys that, were not successors and were just new players to the game. So it was 8 projectors in total, across 6 different brands, encompassing really, the latest and greatest in ultra short throw projection technology.
Yeah. Now, Phil, did you have a hand in selecting the finalists as well, or not the finalists, but the contenders?
Yeah, actually, Brian and I had a long conversation because there are a lot of very good ultra short throw projectors. So we were just trying to figure out what's are, like you said, the most popular ones based on traffic on my site, sales, questions, and things like that to kind of pick some of the more notable projectors. And then also, if you notice, all the projectors also come standalone, which means they are designed to work on a wide variety of screens. So that also makes it easier. And because sometimes they'll sell you the projector with a recommended screen. And we just wanted to say, let's just sell projectors that are designed to work with a wide range of projector screens and a wide range of sizes as well.
Right. And I guess to that, Brian, you paired these with an identical screen, right? What kind of screen was that these were using?
Sure. So we use the Spectra Projection Vantage. It's an ambient light rejecting screen intended for ultra short throw projection. It's one of the highest rated and most popular selling screens. And this is our 3rd year actually doing this type of showdown event. And Spectra Projection had provided us the equipment in year 1. So, we've been fortunate, to have a whole showdown arena, full of ambient light rejecting screens that has, maintained its setup, and we continually use for these types of evaluations, as well as, for customers to come in and be able to see a huge combination of different ultra short throw projectors, at the same time.
Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I was going to say one of the things that I liked about it was the wider viewing angle as well. So that was one of the things as Brian went to look through his plethora of screens, he picked one that had a wider viewing angle, because now you're trying to evaluate multiple 100-inch screens at the same time. So having something with a very wide viewing angle meant that it was easier for you to stand between 2 or even 3 projectors, step back and compare them at the same time. So that was actually another benefit of utilizing that screen.
Yeah, actually, in the entry to the room, you can see all 8, but some of them would be a little bit off axis. So I mean, to give it the best possible showing. Of course, we stepped in front of each one. I was one of the judges, by the way. I didn't mention that earlier, but I was at the event. We'd walk the room basically to see everything head on. I mean, you don't get the kind of off axis problems that you get with an LCD TV. But just to make sure everything was getting a fair shake.
And if you don't mind, Chris, I'll just jump in. One of the other things, Phil talked about the wide viewing angle is that could potentially impact the other screens, right? Because light is shooting off in such a wide angle could hit the other screen. So, we engineered this, engineer is a very sophisticated way of saying, we affixed these blinders, that were deep enough to prevent the light coming off the screen from the viewing angle and affecting the screen next to it. So there was very minimal impact on the screens against each other.
Yeah, I think that worked very well. I saw that, and it didn't really impact the viewing once you're looking at it head on, but it did prevent any of the screen bleed from interacting with the other screens. So that was well done. Now, what's the gain on that screen? It's not unity gain, right? It does reduce a little bit of the output. Is it 0.5?
Yeah, so it's a 0.5 gain.
Okay.
And one of the things when you're talking about these ultra short throw projectors, specifically with ambient light rejecting screens, they're generally all going to be a negative gain, right? So one of the things about that is it will drop the black floor to make the black level look better than like a unity gain white screen, but it also brings down the brightness. So you're not necessarily getting a better contrast ratio, you're getting a better perception of black levels in contrast. But because they're ambient light rejecting, it's kind of interesting how gain and ambient light rejecting intertwine with each other, because with the lights on, even though it's a 0.5 gain, you're going to have a brighter image than you would with a 1.0 gain screen that doesn't have any ambient light rejecting properties.
Yeah. Or a wall, which just forget about it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because people, a screen basically just moves the contrast to where it's going to work best in the room. You don't add more contrast by adding a high gain screen or a low gain screen. It's just, where do you want that contrast to be centered? And in this type of environment, and a lot of times for ultra short throw screens, the lower that type of moving the contrast down to give you better black levels just appeals to be, and more, but it just looks like a better picture most of the time.
Yeah. I just wish they gave you a little bit more of a border on those screens, because I know that they're trying to look like a flat panel TV, so they've got the tiny little bezel, and then when you're aiming or setting up a UST projection screen, sometimes millimeters make a difference. So to have just a little bit of an edge for overshoot would be nice. But Brian, have you seen any screen makers doing that for UST screens or projection screens in general, building a little bit larger screen?
Absolutely. So Stewart Film Screen, they have a model. So the screens that you saw at the event, the Spectras, are using about a 0.5 inch, so a half an inch border. Stewart is doing, I think, about a 1.5 inch, but they've also contoured the bottom, the frame, so that the steep light angle coming up from a UST does not get impacted by the additional frame size and cause a border. So if a person was just to go out and buy like a random traditional projector screen, they will have a shadow at the bottom, and it's minimal, but you're not going to fill that screen entirely. Stewart is one of the most premium screen manufacturers in the country, top tier from both a quality and a price perspective, but they've engineered an awesome solution and have a fantastic product. And Stewart, next year, if you want to donate 10 screens to the Showdown, we'd love to have it.
I do also want to point out too that a lot of times, to correct that problem of overshoot, you go into keystone digital correction, multi-point, 4-point, to try to fit it on the screen. Brian's team did a really good job aligning those screens as much as they possibly could with zero digital keystone correction, because while it'll help you fit the image on the screen, it does have a slight impact, or it could have a major impact, no matter how aggressive you are with it, on resolution. And one of the things that we tested was we looked at edge to edge, sharpness, and we wanted to make sure that that was not impacted by any kind of digital keystone correction.
My question would be, were there any surprises to you guys, having with your vast experience with projectors, UST projectors? Did any of the contenders perform better than you expected or worse than you expected?
Well,
we'll
start with Brian. I'll take this.
Okay, sure.
All of the projectors performed well. The thing is, what we've noticed, and I'm sure, Chris, you probably noticed too, a lot of times your measurement does not really relate to 100% to what you're going to see. Things such as video processing, the tone mapping curves that are chosen, all of those things have an impact on what you're seeing. So a lot of times you may look at this piece at the projector and say, wow, it's supposed to be, this is one of the brighter ones, or this is supposed to have this has the best black level or contrast, because we use a sequential, contrast test pattern and a meter to measure the brightness. But then when you feed it a signal, what you saw was not really, did not really relate to that sometimes. So that was the thing that I noticed about the projectors that were surprising. that,
Yeah.
ones that the ones that shouldn't be the ones that showed the best in black actually did pretty good jobs.
Brian, you want to add a little bit?
Well, one of the things I'll mention is that, this year for the showdown, we went about the projectors being set up in a unique way compared to what's been done historically. And instead of, us internally configuring the projectors and calibrating them, where some manufacturers may say we spent more time on their competitors than them, or we didn't put this setting right or that, or bringing in a third-party calibrator to do it who is not as familiar with all the nuance and the different settings of the projector. This year we're like, hey, manufacturers, you do it, right? Get your butts down here to New Jersey, spend a couple hours and dial in this projector in the way that you think it will be best represented based off of the environment, based off of the content, and based off of the criteria. So several of the manufacturers took us up and made the trip and configured those units themselves. The other ones who were unable to attend did send us their recommended settings, and then we did have one manufacturer, despite, being right down the road, opted out in participating in any way, shape, or form. And what was really interesting in a couple of cases is that some of the manufacturers that took it more seriously, it was evident in how the image was manifested and what the judges thought about it. And some of the people that, kind of took it less seriously and either phoned it in or didn't pick up the phone at all, did not end up being so favorable. So one example is a projector I really like that did not do that well this year, and it's the Epson LS800. That tied for second place last year. And a lot of the reason it did so well is it has this mode called dynamic mode, which really saturates the color. It increases the brightness. It enables dynamic contrast. But Epson this year opted to set it in cinema mode, which may be the most accurate from a cinematic perspective, but did not wow the judges much at all in juxtaposed next to all of the other options out there. And it's an amazing projector, and it's just a decision that Epson made. And I think it would have, all of these projectors could look better potentially based off of how they're set up. They could also look worse. Epson, in my opinion, cinema mode was probably not the best decision, for them to score favorably in the eyes of the judges.
Well, I was going to say there's reference and preference. I stress this all the time. And when I did the review on the LS 800, the most accurate modes are natural and filmmaker. So if you're all about the reference and it has to have, D65 color and blah, 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 those are going to be the modes that you're going to put it in. But it does not mean that that's what people prefer. It's almost like if you look at audio, there's a reason why the loudness button does not make something reference, but people tend to prefer to have a little bit more bass at the bottom, a little bit more sizzle at the top versus a flat frequency response when you look at a pair of speakers. And that also happens here, especially when you see one that is set to be kind of that balanced, flat, natural cinematic against something that is really cranked up, a little bit of pop to it. And what you'll know, even doing our review, everybody noticed on one of the projectors that was very popular that the ultra bright colors were way oversaturated, but many people chose that as their favorite projector for SDR because while it wasn't reference, it looked good, especially with the lights on. So that was something that we noticed as well.
Yeah, that was the 4-movie, the 4-movie theater. And I will step back a minute just to say there were no manufacturers present during the actual competition. So whatever help they offered in getting the settings dialed in based on, again, their recommendations, which was offered to all of the manufacturers, they didn't come in and influence the judging in any way, which I've been to some competitive events where there are manufacturers reps present
poking
in
you
the
in
audience.
the back.
And when judges or commentators make any kind of comment, they're like crying foul. Like you're not allowed to have a public opinion, that each judge should be forming their independent opinion with their own eyes and not talking to anybody else.
Exactly.
Which is not cool.
I'd like to add on that too, is, when the manufacturers did come, they were like not unsupervised, like they were watched, and we made sure that they didn't go into any service menus and like overclock the unit or do anything to to provide a different experience to the end user. All of the firmwares on the units were commercially available, over the air or via, USB to every projector. And then also when it came to them dialing them in, we didn't let them bring in any photospectroradiometers or sophisticated colorimeters. I mean, they were allowed to adjust the white balance, and that was the extent of their so
no CMS adjustments. And
well, no, they could use the CMS if they thought it was too blue. They could taper down the blue, but they weren't able to use a $8,000 Klein K10A to be able to accurately measure it beyond a very
do a full
color
calibration
temperature.
Exactly.
Right.
So I have all that equipment here, and I'm sure, and so does Brian's Calibrate and everything else. But the average person that's going to buy a $3,000, maybe $3,500 projector is not going to call in my buddy Jason Dustle for $1,000 to calibrate it. So, and I've been on both sides of these shootouts, on the manufacturer side and on the judges side. And what always frustrated me from the manufacturer side is one display, they spent 3.5 hours calibrating it deep into the CMS and the 10-point gamma and the 20-point white balance to get it to look good, and the other one took like 5 minutes.
Sorry about that.
We're calling about your extended warranty, Chris.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're doing.
So I'll just do it from the beginning because I know he's going to cut it out. So I've been through. I've had the opportunity to be in multiple, like I said, and I've been to these where some projectors took a few minutes and some projectors took hours of people deep into the 20-point white balance and the CMS to get it right. And lo and behold, the one that had all the time and care went into it by 25 engineers before the event happens to win. Oh, and by the way, hey, Brian, why don't you use this one? It's got a newer firmware we think you should try. And then that wins the king of whatever. And then the next year, but guess what? You're not going to get that. So Brian and I spent probably a huge amount of time talking about the rules. How much time do they have? What type of equipment do they have? And I said, I want to be able to say, if this one won, or this one became a judge's pick, or the judges chose this one as the best one to watch HDR, SDR, what were those settings? So I can go put them in and maybe go get a brightness and contrast pattern, and pretty much get close to what I did, to what we saw in that particular room. And it didn't require some crazy amount of setup in order to achieve it.
Yeah,
sure.
And you guys, I'm sorry, Brian, did you publish the settings that the manufacturers had sent?
No, we have not yet published the settings. We haven't recorded. We're also trying to accurately capture both photo and video of each projector in a couple scenes. And I just want to make a point about like how incredibly difficult that is. It's virtually impossible to capture reflected images of multiple projectors at the same time, right?
Yeah, I know.
So, one of the pains that we're going through right here is we're trying to choose some of the scenes that fell under the highest level of scrutiny with the judges, and we have to photograph them individually, which means we have to adjust the white balance, we have to photograph it with our cameras, we have to color correct it to what we're seeing from our calibrated monitor, on the projector screen to get it as accurate as possible. So that's one scene on one projector, then we got to go to the next one, do all of that again, the next one, all of that again. So, we spent over, I think it was maybe 10 hours so far, and we've gotten 2.
Oh,
and the 2 scenes done across the 8 projectors. So those will be added to our blog. Phil will receive those 2 to incorporate in his content, as will the settings being published. But I do want to just jump back one point because I did neglect to mention it. One of the other things that I think makes this showdown more unique and more realistic to what's going to end up with the end users is that we only used retail models from stock. These were sealed units pulled off of the shelf, which would be the same unit that you would get yourself if you were to make a purchase. So no engineering samples, no beta things. This was as legit as it gets, which is definitely different than other similar type of comparison events, whether they be, at a dealer's location or held on YouTube or wherever the case may be. These are real legitimate retail units. This is what you as the end user are going to get if you spent your hard-earned dollars, and it's going to be the same experience. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And I guess the settings are always a challenge because if you do have them each calibrated, then that may not be representative of what the end customer is actually going to see, but it does, show each projector in their most accurate light. But a calibrated setting isn't necessarily, the most pleasing setting, as Phil has said, reference versus preference. So
the other thing, the way I look at it too sometimes is if the speed limit's 65 and you got 4 cars that can do 200 miles an hour, pulling them down to 65 because that's the speed limit does not mean that you're really seeing what this thing can do. And also the second you put into a room with ambient light, fluorescent light, all that type of stuff, that calibrated thing goes out the window. So if we were looking at $30,000 projectors in darkened spaces dressed in ninja suits, maybe we would have calibrated it that way. But we said, okay, how are someone is going to look at this in a normal environment, and what appeals to people? Now, of course, if you can get that calibrated. If you go to my site, we normally kind of show you what the before and after is. I don't give you every little CMS thing because you're more likely to make it look worse if you use my settings. But I will tell you what color mode, picture mode, color temperature, gamma, to put it into.
And on projector, it's tough because the screen has a huge impact in what the quality of the image is. And the settings would be different with two different screens.
The screen in the room has a major impact. If my room is tan and your room is blue, if you use my RGB settings, it's gonna go the opposite to where you want it to go. So, and the last thing is I tried to limit the amount of test patterns because I've been to these things and it's just, I love Spirits of Muscle and I love my man Joe, but and Joel.
Joe Kane, you're talking about?
Joe Kane, Joel Silver, Spirits of Muscle, you guys make great test patterns, but after about 2 hours in a room, you're like, kill me, right? So we tried to use real world content. We used one test pattern, the motion test pattern, but then we went and played a scene from Baby Driver that basically showed you all of those things in the real world content, vertical stuff and all of the stuff so you can see what was going on. So we tried to limit stuff to real world content, tough real world content, but real world content.
Yeah. And I'd like to just add one more thing about the calibration is, some of these projectors, their strengths are their saturation of color or are their high contrast ratio or their high brightness. And when we're talking about calibration, we're essentially to dumb it down, putting the dots in the boxes, right? There's boxes representative of where the color space would be. And as you're adjusting the CMS and the color, you're getting those dots into the boxes. And that means you're calibrated from a color accuracy standpoint. But that can have a significant impact on your brightness and your contrast. So for a projector or a manufacturer that believes their product's particular strength is their brightness and their vibrancy and their contrast, that could be essentially neutered by trying to make it more color accurate and defeat the strengths of what that is. So to Phil's point, it's like, you're taking a sports car, really fast sports car, and you're limiting yourself to 60 because that's what calibrated or accurate is, but then you're not getting the benefit of all of that extra horsepower.
Right. And I will say, back to the reference versus preference thing, I was a little surprised because, you have all these judges, I think 6 or 8 of us, was 6 of us, I guess?
6 judges, 3 were ISF certified calibrators like yourself as well.
Right. And that 4-movie theater in SDR mode, you could see at times that its colors were a little out there on the spectrum. And I thought it looked dynamic, but I didn't think it looked accurate. So my opinion was that in SDR mode, at least that suffered a bit. But I know some of the other judges were just blown away by, wow, look at that image. It looked much more like a flat panel TV. It was bright, it was punchy, it was vivid. So again, reference versus preference. And that did impact the overall scoring.
I think that's also part of the reason that we put together this panel of judges with diverse views and opinion, right?
Sure.
So as opposed to this just being judged by one person with their particular mindset, well, if you don't agree with how they like to perceive images, then their evaluation may not be as valuable. But we had a combination of professional reviewers, ISF certified calibrators, influential projector reviewers that are technical and experienced, but don't necessarily have that calibration background. And it's really the culmination and the average of all of those points together that hopefully gives the potential consumer a more broad view about how these projectors perform also with the frame of reference of who the judges were and what they liked.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a better cross-section of the general public when you bring in influencers as well as ISF calibrators. And guess what? ISF calibrators don't buy TVs and projectors. We get them sent to us by the manufacturer. We play with them for a few months. We send them back.
We give them back. Yeah, exactly.
Usually give them back.
Sometimes I see that pile in the back of your room there, Chris.
So,
that's not all projectors.
The other thing too was we had to remind all the judges to grade on a curve, because right before this, they went downstairs and looked at two of the most expensive, the
JVC and the new Sony,
the JVC and the new Sony, which are close to $30,000. Yeah, and then you walk back upstairs and you see a $3,000 ultra short throw. You got to have to kind of dump your memory out and say, okay, we are grading on a curve here. It is because one of my reviewers is actually finishing the Nexigo Aurora Pro. I think that's coming up. His review's coming up this week. And we were talking, he was reading the review. He's like, wow, you guys are really the blacks. I'm like, dude, it's on a curve. Okay. Yeah. Because, don't look at it next to the Sony, XW7000 XV7000 you have sitting next to it. Look at it in the perspective of a ultra short throw projector. And that's one of my biggest challenges is I see a projector and I go, wow, that has really good black level. But then I think it has good black level. Then 3 months later or 4 months later, I see another projector that's in the same class. And I go, I'm not sure if that black level is good because I'm trying to use my memory or I'm trying to use a test pattern. And I'm like, why does that one seem like it has better black level, but my measurement says it doesn't, So being able to see them side by side and compare them that way is incredibly helpful and rare even for reviewers, because we don't have a space like Brian to have 800 something inch screen set up at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's pull it back into the performers and the non-performers, but let's talk about the performers. What do you think the top two projectors, we know which two those were, did better than their competition? And I'll start with Phil.
As I mentioned, we were grading on a curve. So no projector was won everything. I mean, every single category. It was which projectors did the most well. That's the best way to think of it. So nobody was a straight A, but who had the highest grade point average is the way that we looked at it. And the two projectors that came up at the top just did more things well. And when you added up the points, that is where they lived. Didn't mean the other ones weren't as good, or there wasn't one that may have outperformed it in a category. It's just the fact
my question is,
they did them well.
What did the Hisense PX3 Pro and the 4-movie theater premium do better than the rest? And if maybe it's not the same thing on both. In my opinion, the contrast and the expanded color gamut on the 4-movie theater premium made it, set it apart. It really did look, it had a punchy, bright image that drew you in, that was really enjoyable. So what do you think was the best on the 4-movie?
If I look at the PX3 Pro, it was brightness, punchiness. It could do the white colors when it was told to do that, and it was supposed to do that. But and so it was really, so that was the thing. It did a really good job delivering high what do they call it? Average frame. It could have a bright picture and maintain its highlights and maintain vibrant color without washing out the blacks. And it did that really well on SDR and HDR material.
I agree.
And that was one of the reasons why it won out. It did so well.
Sure. Yeah. And so Brian,
I can tell you what the judges think, right? Because I love everyone in this contest, and they're all my favorite projectors ever.
Yes.
So to Phil's point, the Hisense PX3 Pro, it has a high level of brightness, and it maintained good black levels and shadow detail while providing a vibrant image across essentially all of the content, right?
Okay.
Now, when it came to the 4-movie theater, and when you ask about like a surprise, this was actually kind of a surprise for me. So this is the premium model. This won in sharpness in both
Right.
detail and sharpness in both SDR and HDR, which made it, score-wise, the sharpest projector overall.
Yeah.
Now, the predecessor, the 4-movie theater, which won the previous 2 showdowns, definitely was not the sharpest projector. It looked good, but there are some issues as far as the corners. This new unit had superior edge-to-edge sharpness and uniformity, and it too also did really well when it came to black level and shadow detail. Didn't quite have the same brightness as the PX3 Pro. However, it did win the SDR content, right? So there's a mix of both score tabulation as well as judges' preference that factored into some other things as well. And the 4-movie theater also had the best motion handling according to the scorecard, tied with the PL2.
So do you think that's the optics? It's a better lens this year than the predecessor? Because that's normally what relates to the clarity and the detail.
Yeah, so I know it's a new and improved lens. So just thinking about the theater premium specifically, 400 lumens of additional brightness, a sharper, improved lens, a shorter throw distance, Google TV operating system, and some other types of upgrades. And with the PX3 Pro, its predecessor, the PX2 Pro, tied for second place last year with the Epson LS800. And Hisense this year came out really swinging. I mean, they increased the contrast by over 3 times. They put in dynamic contrast, AI image processing. I mean, it was a great day for Hisense.
Oh yeah, and I mean, again, as Phil says, it's all based on memory. But I did not remember last year's Hisense PX2 Pro being as dynamic or as high performance as the PX3. It seemed like a very big improvement. And I think I would credit you guys, with doing these kinds of events where the manufacturers realize there's a lot of exposure here. There's a lot of excitement over these showdowns. We should really, take their feedback into consideration in the actual hardware and, make the default settings brighter and more dynamic, make the, improve the lens quality, improve the operating system, move from Android TV to Google TV because people are complaining about that. So I think events like this are a net positive for the industry because they show the manufacturers what really matters to prospective buyers.
And, as we're speaking about that, I'm going to jump back to where we talked about surprises. This was actually a pretty big surprise because the 3rd place unit, essentially, it came in number 3 for judges' pick, total points, SDR points. It came in 2nd place for HDR points, was the Hisense PL2. And that's a single laser projector, right? It was the 2nd least projector in this contest, only being one above the 4-movie Cinema Edge. But this single laser, did significantly well all across the board at a $2,500 price point. So I personally was not expecting to see it score so highly, but it did very well in a lot of different areas. If you refer back to the scorecard, and as a fly on the wall in the room, I heard you guys all mention that name more times than I would have expected. Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, most of the HDR material that you're looking at, most of the content you're looking at, does not need super wide color gamut. So when you're looking at the majority of material that we looked at, human skin, most of the scenes in movies, it's not shot that in the wider color gamut. We did pop up a couple of scenes that did have a wide color gamut stuff, and that's where the tri-lasers really said, "Oh, okay, look what I can do." But the majority of what you're watching does not require that big of a box of crayons. So now it becomes how good is your video processing, your tone mapping, and all the other stuff. So the knowledge Hisense has got lots and lots of years of experience doing laser TVs, or especially blue laser phosphor. So it was a very good looking device for the money.
Right. Yeah, I know Hisense has been in the game really longer than anybody. I think they sort of invented the term laser TV, or were the first ones to use it commercially. And they stayed in it. I mean, there were some other manufacturers that got into the UST game briefly and then got out. So, one of the questions that we got actually on our video was a little surprising to me. Should prospective buyers be concerned about buying, less well-known brands like they said Hisense 4-movie in Mexico? I reminded them that Hisense has been in the game again longer than anybody, but it's a valid question for 4-movie only in this country for about 3 years. And I guess Mexico maybe about the same or even less, right? Aren't they a newer company?
So Nexigo was relatively newer to the projection space, but Nexigo has been manufacturing webcams and other type of product for many years. So they were less known in the particular projection space, and the customer's concern is totally valid, right? Who are these people? Are they going to be around? Are they going to, is there longevity to support it? Well, just so like I said, based off of my experience working with them for, almost 3 years at this point right now, they both do a very good job of addressing customer service issues. They support their customers. We may have less complaints about their service than we do with some other more traditional projector brands that we work with. Not stating that about anyone in the UST space, but we sell a whole lot of projectors.
Sure.
Now, also, For Movie 2 is part of a larger conglomerate, right? So in China, they're a relatively large company. They're part of the Xiaomi ecosystem. So their company is in partnership with Xiaomi as well as Appotronics. Appotronics developed the ALPD light engine that's used in the 4 movie, that's used in the Nexago, and OEM'd for brands, all across the globe. So while they're relatively new here domestically in the USA, they're not some fly-by-night organization. And, the history of what they've done over the past couple of years, should eschew many concerns. And Hisense, they're like, I think, number 1 globally in televisions. They're not a
they're in the top 4. They're in the top 4.
Yeah. You go to CES now, and Hisense's booth is growing, and everybody else is
by volume, Chris.
By volume. The other thing too is what I've noticed, because I've been doing this for a little bit of time, that whenever there's new technologies, a lot of these companies you never heard of or were small grow. So, because I've been around since, you want a color TV, you want a Magnavox. You want a Sony. You want a Sony. If you want a black and white TV, you want a Magnavox or RCA. You want a color and color SD, before HD color. You wanted a Sony or a Panasonic.
Trinitron, baby.
Then you went to HD. All of a sudden, this company, Lucky Gold Star / LG, and the other company, Samsung, pops up, right? Then when we get into 4K, a little bit more acceleration. Then we go to flat panel, and it's like someone shook the Etch-a-Sketch, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, boom! Here's the Koreans are the guys making the great stuff. Now we're going into micro LED, and you'll see Hisense and TCL, these other companies growing. So whenever there's a big shuffle in video technology, it's an open playing field. Everybody's starting from some pretty much scratch. So there's a lot of companies that are emerging in this field of projection that are doing a really good job, even though you may not be as familiar with them as some of the big guys.
Yeah, I think 4 Movie burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, and people were like, who are they and why do they look so good? It really made an impression. And I think you're right, Phil, the market gets shaped up a lot. I mean, TV market now, you don't really see, at least in the US market, you don't see Sharp and Toshiba and Magnavox and, Sylvania and all these Quasar. Go find a Magnavox 85-inch 8K TV. I don't think you're going to find it. So there is, going to be a shift. And I think Hisense is one of the ones that's stepping in to the gap left by some of the Japanese manufacturers both in the TV and the projection space to provide high value, products.
One other thing I also mentioned, Hisense also, just like I said, Appotronics manufactures units for other people. Hisense too has a whole original equipment manufacturing aspect of it. So there are other players in the space, specifically in the UST as well as in the lifestyle space, that are being manufactured by Hisense as well.
Right, like Leica. I mean, Leica is a $9,000-$10,000 UST with the projector itself is made by Hisense, and they add the Leica lens.
And some additional other special sauce. There's some special things about that.
You got to get something for your $9 or $10,000. Yeah. All right, cool. So I guess, has there been a lot of feedback or fallout from the event? What's the general feeling from your readers, your viewers, been since the event results were shared? I guess about a week ago. Or a little less.
Well, I guess I'll jump in there. So this is our 3rd showdown, and we've learned that you can't please everyone all the time, whether it's the manufacturers or potential customers or even consumers who own a product and are there rooting as if it was their team, and if their team doesn't win, they take it as if it was a loss of the Super Bowl. Generally, the feedback's been positive. There's obviously some people that thought the choice of having the manufacturers adjust them versus us calibrating them on the more technical crowd, may have preferred it to have been professionally calibrated, but I kind of already explained the whole rationale Phil and I had behind this, because even last year we had them professionally calibrated by third-party ISF certified calibrator, and some of the manufacturers were displeased with how they performed, and they came in and they're like, oh, well, you didn't turn this dynamic contrast setting onto medium, and you didn't put this thing onto here, and you didn't put this thing onto here. And we're like, well, how are we supposed to know? We're here just trying to make them accurate. And if all of those settings should have been on, why weren't they on in the first place? Right? And this just gets back to the manufacturers. Like, if you think it's best a certain way, at least make all of those options as a mode that's easy enough for a user to go and enable,
exactly.
You could have a showdown mode.
Exactly.
Press this button. And maybe next year they'll take this opportunity a little more seriously. The manufacturers that didn't step up, that didn't participate, it can be a learning experience for them as well. I mean, I hate to throw it back at them, but if you give them the opportunity and you use the information they give you, or the lack of information they give you, and if the performance suffers, then who's that on?
Sure. And
it's kind of on them.
And all of these manufacturers, we've expressed the invitation for them to come back. We're keeping the room set up for several weeks at this point right now. And now they're welcome to bring whatever sophisticated equipment they want to measure anything and really see how their unit looked using the exact same content in the same room with the same setup, to see for themselves how it performed and learn from that to potentially enhance it in the future. And I will say, Hisense came last year. They took this very seriously, and we've been speaking with them for years about enhancements to be making to the product. And I can't say that we're responsible for them incorporating it, but the PX3 Pro really did include a lot of the things that we've been discussing for a while about what we would love to see incorporated in an ultra short throw projector, to really be very strong in the space.
Did you get a chance to listen to the sound of any of these? Because last year it was funny how bad the Hisense was.
so
did it improve?
Chris was a judge in the audio portion last year. So this year we're like, you know what? It's not just his ears that have value. Maybe his eyes are good too. So let's bring him in as a video judge.
But we didn't really have time to do any kind of
we didn't have time. And last year when we did the audio, it was a whole separate day, and every projector was placed in the exact same spot. So there was no acoustic differences between the room or anything. I've informally listened to a lot of these things, right? And I can tell you that the 4-movie theater premium still is number one when it comes to
Bowers and Wilkins
sound. They updated it even further this year. I generally would not recommend using the onboard audio for these if someone wants a truly cinematic experience, right? Because you're taking your whole sound stage into 18 inches on a 100 or 150 inch screen. But the 4-movie, if you have to use the onboard audio for any of them, the 4-movie is still would be my suggestion.
The better one.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, just maybe a wrap up for, what do you guys think was the takeaway? Looking forward to next year. Phil, go.
Okay. Well, my takeaway was you can't just depend on specs on a sheet or a measurement in order to determine what is the best picture. A projector is a group of ingredients, and the video processing is the recipe. And the recipe you use can either get you more than what you expect from those ingredients or a little bit less. So trust your eyes is the first one. I love the fact that Brian does these so we can actually see them all together.
Great.
And last but not least, I know that I'm a vidiot, and I know a lot of other vidiots out there wanted us to do these fancy, the hardcore calibrations, but we really wanted to focus on the key customers, the 99.5% of these who are going to be taken out of the box and placed on the shelf. I've been trying to convince Brian to do the big boys. And then of course, when we do those, we'll calibrate. But overall, I thought it was a great experience. All these projectors have strengths and weaknesses. I would tell you to look at the Brian did a really good job of breaking them down. So look at what features you care about the most and weigh those heaviest for you. Because if it does something really great and you don't care about it, why that should be something that you should kind of not, that shouldn't be at the top of your list. Pick the features that you care about most, and the ones that did those best are the ones as a projector that you should choose.
Yep. Brian?
Well, I would just, one, I want to thank everyone for being a participant. This is a pretty massive endeavor, despite it may not appearing so, to the person consuming all of our content. And, to Phil's point, I would love to do more of these types of showdowns, with different types of projectors and other things. Right. So this is where, the business person comes in. So people watching this, help support us. These things are expensive to put on. So please, stop making the billionaires of the world even richer and help, small family-owned businesses, be able to sell you home theater products so we can afford to be pulling units off of the shelf, flying out judges, dedicating resources to all of this type of stuff. And, I look forward to working with Phil again on other types of showdown. I look forward to having you join us again, Chris, if you'd ever like to do so. And I hope this is as valuable to the general public as, we all think it was valuable.
Yeah. And I will say, objectively speaking, you're not paying a price premium by buying from projectorscreen.com. In fact, probably quite the opposite. And as you said, small family owned business. It's always good to support those. Okay. Thanks again, guys, for joining us in this recap of the 2024 UST Showdown. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Excellent. Adios. Thank you, Chris. Good seeing you, Phil. Take care, everyone.